In 1970, a teenage boy in Florida took part in a robbery. By the end of that night, a man was dead. The boy's name was Tony Alvin Ables. He was only 16 years old. At an age when most people are worrying about school and friends, Tony Ables was standing in a courtroom facing a charge of first-degree murder. He would plead guilty, and he would be sentenced to life in prison. It seemed like the story was over before it even began, but it wasn't. Because 12 years later, that same teenager, now a grown man, would walk free. And after his release, women began to die. Now, let's tear into it. Tony Alvin Ables grew up in Florida during the 1960s. Behind closed doors, his childhood was anything but normal. According to later testimony from his family, their home was ruled by fear. Tony's father was abusive, violent, unpredictable. Arguments were constant, beatings were worse. Eventually, their mother fled the home to escape the abuse, leaving the boys behind. Tony grew up in an environment of anger, instability, and violence. And for him, it seemed to plant the seeds of what he would later become. By 1970, Tony was already drifting into crime. That year, at just 16 years old, he became involved in a robbery in St. Petersburg, Florida. Details are scarce, but the result is clear. During the robbery, a man was killed. Whether Tony personally caused the death or not has never been fully clarified. But legally, it didn't matter. Tony was arrested, charged with first-degree murder. In March of 1971, he pleaded guilty. The court sentenced him to life in prison. 16 years old, life behind bars. For 12 years, Tony lived behind prison walls. Then in 1983, the system gave him a second chance. He was released on parole. He was 28 years old. To the state, he had paid his debt. To society, he was now considered rehabilitated. Tony found work as a construction laborer. He kept a low profile. He blended in. On the surface, it looked like a success story, but it wouldn't last. Only 5 months after his release, tragedy struck again. On June 25, 1983, an 83-year-old woman named Adeline McLaughlin was found dead in her apartment. She was a retired widow from Worcester, Massachusetts. Neighbors described her as quiet but friendly. Someone had broken in through a window. Inside the apartment, Adeline was suffocated with a pillow. Her home was burglarized. The crime shocked the building. No one suspected the man who had just been released from prison for murder. Police searched for clues. They questioned neighbors. They looked for fingerprints, but they found nothing solid. No witnesses, no clear suspect. And Tony Ables continued living freely, going to work, going home. Another woman was dead, and once again, Tony walked away unnoticed. 4 years later, Tony entered another relationship. Her name was Deborah Kisor. She was 31 years old, originally from Monterey, California. On February 14, 1987, Valentine's Day, Deborah was last seen alive. She was using a payphone outside an apartment building. Someone saw her standing there. Then she vanished. The next morning, a passerby found her body near Roser Park Bridge. Deborah's body was partially clothed. Her legs were bruised. Her blue jeans were found beside her. She had been sexually assaulted, and she had been murdered. Police immediately began searching for answers. Who was she with last? Who did she know? Who could have done this? The investigation led straight to her boyfriend, Tony Ables. Tony was questioned, but this was 1987. DNA testing was still limited. There were no cameras, no witnesses, no forensic proof tying him to the crime. Despite being the obvious suspect, Tony was never arrested. Once again, a woman was dead, and Tony Ables walked free. By 1990, Tony was living with another woman. Her name was Marlene Burns. She was 48 years old. Their relationship was unstable. Neighbors heard frequent arguments. On June 4, 1990, one of those arguments turned violent. Tony pushed Marlene down a staircase. Then he beat her and kicked her. Neighbors heard the disturbance. Some had already called police. Then they saw Tony leaving the apartment. They saw him wiping blood from his hands. When police arrived, they found Marlene Burns dead. This time, Tony couldn't escape. He was arrested on the spot. Tony was charged with first-degree murder. In 1992, he went to trial. The jury found him guilty. They recommended the death penalty in an 8-4 vote, but the judge overruled them. He cited Tony's mental health issues and his abusive childhood. Instead of death, Tony was sentenced to life in prison. For years, 2 murders remained unsolved. Adeline McLaughlin in 1983, Deborah Kisor in 1987. Both cases went cold. Both women were gone. Tony sat in prison for killing Marlene Burns. No one publicly connected him to the others. Then, in 2006, detectives reopened the cold cases. They submitted Tony Ables' DNA for testing. They wanted to see if it matched any unsolved murders. The results were clear. His DNA matched evidence from both women. After more than 20 years, the truth came out. Tony Alvin Ables wasn't just a murderer. He was a serial killer. Police officially booked him for Adeline McLaughlin's murder. They never charged him for Deborah Kisor's. He was already serving life. But the case was considered closed. According to St. Petersburg police, there is a strong possibility Tony Ables may be connected to other unsolved crimes. Crimes we may never know about. Victims we may never be able to name. Stories we may never hear. Tony Ables killed at 16. He was released at 28. He killed again and again. The system gave him chances, and people paid the price. This wasn't a mystery killer hiding in the shadows. This was a man everyone thought had changed. Tony Ables lived openly, worked openly, loved openly, and killed repeatedly. Not because he was invisible, but because no one was looking closely enough. 3 women lost their lives, possibly more, and none of them had to die. Their stories were buried for decades, until science finally spoke for them. Tony Alvin Ables remains in prison today, connected to at least 3 murders, and possibly more. His story is a warning. What happens when the system fails? What happens when early violence is ignored? Sometimes justice doesn't fail once. Sometimes it fails again and again and again. Thanks for watching.